What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Dylan Talks Tone. Today we are going to talk about nut stuff. Not only are we going to talk about nut stuff, we're going to talk about how low your nuts are. So that's really it. And we're going to talk about the consistency between guitar brands and guitar setup versus quality control a little bit, which is an interesting thing because it can be a little different from brand to brand. I'm also going to show you a new tool that I got from StuMac. They sent this over to me. The video's not sponsored, but they did give me this tool and a couple other things to show you. But we're going to do this over a couple of videos because there's a lot to talk about with nuts. So for this one, we're going to just talk about measuring nuts and how to do that. So let's look at first the kind of conventional way that we can measure a nut. Basically, we have a set of feeler gauges. So then what we would do is just put this underneath here. Oh, it's less than 20 thousandths. Just use a feeler gauge and figure out how high the nut is, right? There's a couple of, not problems, but things you need to know. One is since the string is on a straight line when it's idle, okay? So it's on an angle like this. If the string height down here is way high, that's going to affect the nut height underneath the string. So your guitar setup needs to be sort of in somewhere in the neighborhood of correct. A lot of people would say 2 millimeters. A lot of people would say 70 thousandths. A lot of people would say 5/64 on the low E, 3/64 on the high E. Get that sort of in the neighborhood. And then down here, you're looking at somewhere between 15 and 20 thousandths usually to get us in the neighborhood. The reason it's so important is because if it's too high, in our first position chords, we could actually pull it out of tune. I think we've done that in a guitar video recently where we've had the nut height was too high and it would pull the guitar out of tune. So adjusting that nut keeps your guitar in tune. It really is a big deal. So, and also obviously, keeping it in tune, letting the string slide back and forth, etc. So that's a whole nut cutting video that we're going to get into soon, but we want to just talk about measuring it. So when you put that underneath there, and you see, okay, it's about that high. Here's the problem. If you do this, so first of all, make sure your string height is, in range, and then put this underneath here. The problem is if you don't do this right, you can push up on the string. It can end up being a little bit higher than you want. You can also hold it at a little different angle, so you got to make sure that that's the right angle, and set it on the fret properly, which is no big deal. That's the way we've been doing it for years and years and years, obviously. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is take your finger and fret the 3rd fret like this, and then measure underneath the 1st fret. So what you're doing is you're taking the string height calculation out of it, and you're just fretting the 3rd fret, and then just seeing if there's some light underneath there. Because if there's a little bit of light, then you don't have a buzz, right? So if there's a little bit of light underneath there with this on the 3rd fret, which you can do, and you could put, you could choose a size that you want to fit under there of your feeler gauge. This is kind of by eye, if that makes sense. And just make sure that there's a little bit of light underneath there. In fact, you can get down level with the guitar and look underneath there and just make sure there's a little bit of light. And you can do that. But that's not 100% exact either. So most of these methods that we've used for guitar nut setup forever have been kind of fiddly, which is fine because they work. And if you've been doing it that way for 20 years, I know that there's gonna be people in the comments and be like, I've been doing it this way for 20 years and all my nuts are perfect. Probably, but they're probably not perfect, but they're probably fine. You know what I mean? Because humans are imperfect of the way we look at stuff. It's no big deal. No big deal at all if that's how you want to use it with just feeler gauges and your hand. Like, totally get it. Because this tool is about $100. So something right in there. I'll leave a link to it in the description. But this is a nut height gauge. And basically, Well, let me show you how it works.
Okay, so the way this thing works is it's a couple of pieces when you first get it. It is the gauge and then the brass block on the bottom. And all this really is a depth gauge. Now you turn it on and you can do millimeters or thousandths of an inch. We're going to do thousandths of an inch. And then there's a reset button. And what these grooves are is you can see where the plunger for the measuring can go down in between, or it sits on top of a string, and then these go down between the strings. Okay, so now we've got it set on the guitar. And basically what you've got here now is this is down between the strings. The block is down between each of these strings, and that plunger is sitting on top of the E string. But we only want to measure the height below the E string. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this thing on. That measurement doesn't matter right now. We're just going to zero it. Now it's zeroed. And now we're going to press down on the plunger. Got to hold it still. Press down on the plunger, and now we've got 25 thousandths. Because basically we've taken the diameter of the string out by resetting it, and we've got 25 thousandths of nut height, which I suppose is okay, but I like it a little lower than that. We can do the same thing, move it down to the next string, zero it again because the string is a different diameter. You want to take the string diameter out, and now we have 27 thousandths of nut height. 26 and a half. So you see how inconsistent a factory guitar can be. 20 thousandths on the D string, 14 thousandths on the G string. I tell you what, let's go get a PRS and see how good that is. Okay, so here we have my PRS 21. Move it to the next string and reset it. 21. Move it to the next string and reset it. 16. Move it to the next string and reset it. 15. Move it to the next string and reset it. 15. So they must be doing these on purpose. So this is pretty consistent. That's pretty neat. Of course, you can use it to set your string height at the 12th fret also. So let's reset this and see what the string height is. 71, which that's kind of what I would shoot for, I think. 62. 59. Boy, they're really exact on this stuff. 57. There you go. I guess we should grab a Fender too. Let's make it fair. All right, this is an American Pro 2 Tele straight out of the box. 35. 30. 27. I knew Fender's standard was pretty high. 28. Ooh, kind of all over the place. 23. Yeah, so this nut's a little bit all over the place. We might as well check a Gibson too, huh? All right, let's check my Gibson Les Paul / November Burst. 25. 23. 19. 23. 22. And then to do the bottom strings, which we haven't done, we flip this around so that it sits square on the neck still. And we'll reset this one. Whoops, hang on. 23, 18. This is better than the Fender. Still a little all over the place though.
So this is a pretty cool tool. You can really get super precise with this. Let's talk about a couple of things. One is I would not read too much into when you see one that's like 21 thousandths and then the other one is like 19 thousandths. Like when we're talking about 3 thousandths of an inch here, we're talking about, a third of the thickness of the E string. That is definitely a human error thing, especially when somebody is fine tuning this, by themselves. If the guitar is plecked, like in this example, and I think the PRS too, they're going to be more precise, but I don't know if they pleck the nut or if they just pleck the frets. Every guitar brand does that a little bit differently. Let's talk about the Fender, because the Fender was so high. And we're going to talk about quality control versus setup. A lot of people want to say that, for example, the quality control on that Fender is terrible because it was 35 thousandths. I happen to know that their nut height and their string height calculations, the standards from Fender, are very high. I don't mean like high standards, I mean like the measurements are high. The reason they do that is because everybody wants their nut cut a little bit differently depending on how they play guitar, especially on a telly, because a telly is kind of a sloppy guitar. You can set that guitar up lots of different ways and it'll work well. If they set the nut very, very low from the factory and you wanted it higher, then that would mean you would need to replace your nut. So they give you a little room to work with, knowing that you're going to take the guitar, have it set up however you want, and then the guitar is going to be good after that. Buy a new guitar, have it set up by somebody. I always say this and everybody says, well, that's quality control. No, get your guitar set up for you because you might play it a little bit differently. That's why it's really nice to have a tool like this so that you can do it yourself. Now, it doesn't just take this, because we actually need to cut nuts. If the nut's too high, then we actually need to cut it. So we've got these StewMac nut cutting files and the little backing bars, which I really, really like. You don't need these backing bars. You can just use the file in your hand. But man, this makes it really nice. We're not going to get into this right now because this is a whole nother thing. So we're going to come out with another video very soon that's going to jump straight into how we're going to cut these nuts. I'm going to go ahead and leave all these nuts alone on these guitars. I should say all of the guitars that I showed you today are 100% factory. I have not touched them. This is my personal Les Paul, but I've never actually worked on it. The Explorer I've never worked on because we just got that. The Telecaster I haven't touched yet, but it's going to need some work. So we will use all of these guitars. We'll get them super tight tolerance in line with this tool and these nut file sets, and we'll do that in a future video so that you can understand exactly how to do it properly. The Les Paul is going to be the trickiest because we've got all the angles, so we'll talk about that, and that way you don't need to use one of them stupid things you put on the peg head. All that stuff will make this properly good so that the G stays in tune. We'll do all those things in an upcoming video using the StewMac files and the StewMac backing bars. I'll leave links to all this stuff now in the description of this video so that you can find it. But just know, nut height is important, and it's probably not going to come perfect from the factory depending on whatever guitar you get because it's not set up for you. So just know that you're going to have to mess around with it a little bit. Not all the time, but sometimes. The PRS, I don't think we have to touch at all. I think it kind of depends on the brand. Like I said, different brand standards as far as how they set them from the factory. Of course, quality control can be a thing. I think this is pretty close, but not perfect. The Fender is crazy all over the place. The PRS was perfect. The Explorer was a little off. We will go ahead and get all these things tightened up in a future video. Thanks for hanging out. Do me a favor and use the links below because that does help out the channel. Do me a favor and check us out on Patreon for ad-free versions of all of our videos, as well as our live stream Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. All kinds of fun stuff. We got a bunch of cool stuff coming. I have videos stacked up content-wise, and I think you're going to dig it. I think when you see this video, I'm actually going to be in Colorado building a guitar at Texas Toast Guitars, so stay tuned for that content coming out as well. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you in the next video.